I think that this project is still going to be very effective for people and provide the analysis and insights that some folks can't focus on right now. The folks on the island are back in a recovery mode. These are my two advisors at Berkeley, Duncan Calloway and Danielle Rivera. Duncan's an engineer. Danielle is a landscape architecture and justice expert, and Danielle is also Puerto Rican. So I have a really great opportunity to do what people in my department, the Energy and Resources Group, do so well, is pull from several different disciplines, be that Indigenous methodologies and disaster studies, policy analysis, environmental justice, and the engineering aspects that I've mentioned already. And that's me in my element, being able to really learn from all of these different people. So now I want to spend some time to give you background knowledge about what's going on in Puerto Rico. Some of you might be aware of this if you've followed the news over the last 5 years. And for others of you, this might be new information. You're in good company because throughout the 2 years that I've been at Berkeley and the previous 2 years that I've worked with Ruth, so a total of about 4 years, I've asked anyone who will listen if they know what's going on in Puerto Rico. Former Governor Jerry Brown wasn't aware of what's going on in terms of the fossil fuel, continued use of fossil fuels in the recovery process. And several other of my professors had no idea. So this has been really also a process of educating people that are not aware. So this is the island of Puerto Rico, broken into the regions. And I want to point out that my mentor works and lives in Salinas, which is there in the southeastern portion. And what you'll notice is that this is a map from the US Geological Survey. What you'll notice is that most of the hurricanes over the last century are coming from the southeast and going through the island, namely Maria and Irma in 2017 were some of the most damaging in recent history. And this map, I find it to be such a good visual and also quite damning that there's so much overlap between the storms. And what this really means on a ground level when it comes to electricity, when you're looking at a map like this, it's important to recognize that 97% of the island's electricity is imported petroleum, liquefied natural gas, and coal. These fossil fueled electricities are very harmful for the community, not just in Puerto Rico, but globally, because the pollution from these sources travels. And essentially what happens when a storm hits, because of the fragility of the electric grid in Puerto Rico and all the deferred maintenance that's happened, about 3 million, the total of the residents on the island, lose their electricity when the storm hits. And the question that comes up is, for how long? And who gets their power restored first? I think that this is something to really sit with. And in California, we have a decent understanding of what it feels like to have a blackout or a power outage. But in Puerto Rico, the scope and the scale is so much larger than even what we experience. Another interesting fact is that in the United States, our average residential electricity rate is about 16 cents per kilowatt hour. Whereas you look at Puerto Rico and the people of Puerto Rico are paying around 36 cents for unreliable access to electricity. Why is this still the case? Well, that's one of the things that I'm looking at in my research. So as we talk about the power generation and what that looks like on the island, I wanted to point out where these power plants are and what they are. The center of Puerto Rico is mostly mountainous forest with some towns throughout. And what you'll notice is that there's a lot of power plants in both the south and also the north. You'll see that several of these larger circles, which shows the capacity of that generator, are both brown and that lighter brownish gold color. And those are both petroleum and natural gas. And you don't really see many other colors. The other colors are renewable energy like wind and solar. And then there's also some hydro dams that are in the central of Puerto Rico. I like this image because it shows you really where the electricity is coming from, where it's being generated, and how much effort it's going to take to get the electricity from the south up to the north, where San Juan and the majority of the tourism and the capital are. This image is also from the same source, the EIA. And what this shows is the age of the power plant. So when they started initially operating. What you'll notice is that the 60s and the 70s were a big time of building plants. These, again, are the same color scheme. So it's petroleum and natural gas. And what's important to note is that it takes, most plants operate for about 30 years, barring any other issues. So 30 years would take the plant to about the year 2000. And then you have more petroleum and natural gas plants being built. And what we're in right now is sort of off of the edge of this graph into 2023. And the questions that are coming up today are, how are we going to build the next generation of power plants on Puerto Rico? Are we going to continue to choose fossil fuels? Or are the people of Puerto Rico and the decision makers of Puerto Rico and the folks in DC that control the funding for these projects, are they all collectively going to choose a different future? And so, seeing all these graphs and this data, I want to encourage you to imagine the impact on the residents when a hurricane hits one of those coal plants or the natural gas plants or the newer liquefied natural gas ports that bring these materials from the Gulf Coast of the United States. It not only is knocking out power, but it's causing environmental damage and other larger downscale issues. What I'm exploring is the climate justice implications and the social benefits of what it would mean to have increased electricity system resilience through the disaster recovery process, essentially using the billions in disaster recovery funds to leapfrog over old fossil fuel infrastructure and move towards a system that doesn't need billions of dollars every few years to recover from storms. What I'm choosing to use now for methods due to the current storm recovery on the island, I'm choosing to analyze documents, financial records, and looking at the history of recovery proposals from businesses and folks on the island who manage the power grid. What that means is I'm doing a content analysis of these materials to ask the research question of, to what extent is resilience measured in the electric grid recovery of Puerto Rico? So I'm going to preview this. There are essentially two choices: to have a decentralized grid or a centralized grid. Currently, Puerto Rico operates on a centralized grid, much like many parts of the world. And if you followed any of the news in Puerto Rico, you know that about a year and a half ago, their grid was privatized to a company called LUMA with roots in both Canada and Texas. So their grid is now privatized, and it's mostly fossil fuel dominant. There's been repeat failures and even longer outages than times around the immediate aftermath of Maria. And there's a lot of political strength behind the company LUMA and its partners. Many people that are residents of Puerto Rico have opted for a decentralized approach through the Queremos Sol, or We Want Sun proposal. So I've studied this in my research, and what the folks are proposing is community-owned power, similar to what we've seen in San Diego with community choice aggregation options that have come up over the last 5 years. They are suggesting renewables dominant grid, mainly rooftop solar with storage that would be resilient to storms. And this is a very grassroots group that has gained influence, but didn't start with influence. So now that we have some background on the situation in Puerto Rico, I'm going to take us through a few definitions of resilience. And I'm sure many of you have been familiar with the word resilience and a social aspect, maybe even in this electricity space. But I also want to say that resilience is known as a buzzword. So I have been kind of resistant to using it in my research, but I also recognize that there's something that only can be captured with this concept. And this is why I am pushing to be critical and also to rethink what resilience means and question if we have actually defined it accurately to be useful for disaster recovery. So I'll quickly go through 4 or 5 definitions. In politics, the definition is used by the Obama administration as resilience, meaning the ability to prepare for and adapt to changing conditions to withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. Kind of abstract, but they're very focused on preparation, adaptation, and recovery, looking at several different steps in this process. In engineering, I underline the word reliability because engineers are very focused on electricity reliability. In this report, they specifically defined resilience, and they said in the context of the power system, resiliency includes the ability to harden the system against high impact, low frequency events. And they also mentioned recovering quickly. The term harden really keeps the existing system. So that's something to keep in mind. Is resilience hardening only? Another reliability definition, just to dig further on the engineering aspect, this is from the United States Code, is reliable operation of the electric grid means operating the elements of a bulk power system within equipment and electric system thermal, voltage, and stability limits. It goes on to talk about disruptions and other incidents, but the clear thing here is that in reliability, you're looking at what an electricity system can operate in and not exactly looking at how you can ensure that it is safe going forward. So I think this is a limitation in engineering that isn't necessarily capturing the full opportunity of resilience. In social science, and sort of in more casual conversations, when we talk about resilience, we're talking about the ability of groups or communities to cope with external stresses and disturbances as a result of some kind of change. This makes sense. And for certain, the people of Puerto Rico are a resilient community, having weathered hundreds of years of colonialist practices and policies, and the influence of outside companies. But this also doesn't quite capture what's going on and what is needed for the electricity system. So a thinker and somebody who is very active in the Department of Energy right now is Shalonda Baker. And I've leaned into her